coming to you live from the northern parts of Israel. And we'll talk real quick about what's happening in the Bitcoin and crypto markets. You may have noticed in the last day and today that all the YouTube Jimmies are out there, all the ones showing silly crypto advice about trading or holding or anything else. And they're all saying, crypto has bottomed. This is it. We're going for the big win. And they're all quoting these analysts and showing charts, showing ridiculously irrelevant things like the 50 moving average, the 50-week moving average. They say it found support on the 50-week moving average. Didn't even touch the 50-week moving average, but that's not the point. The only thing that moves the markets is buy pressure and sell pressure. And the only what the probable direction of the asset is going to be is by using the VEPS, which is volatility, entropy, probabilities, and statistics. So when it comes to the question of has Bitcoin bottomed and have altcoins bottomed, and are we in for a big bull run now? Because Q2 is here, it's coming up in a week. Just remember, when people quote you historical averages based on meaningless things like price, which is random in a random market pretty much all the time except when it isn't. And when it isn't, it's in a trending move, and you can see those trending moves with entropy, and you can see those random walks also with entropy, specifically the alpha trading entropy pro indicator. When you see folks telling you, oh, the bottom is in, because they saw it on some chart where they drew a support line, or they used some 50 moving average on the weekly, or they used a chart from some analyst or reports from some analysts at some firms who say, yeah, well, historically Q2 has always been delivering 20% returns or whatever. Let me remind you, last year when people thought, oh, Q1 was really strong, Q2 is going to be even stronger. When it topped out in Q1 last year, I told you it's going to go sideways probably for a good long while, maybe anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And that's exactly what it did. It went sideways, even down, right? And shook the hands of weak people or weak holders significantly, releasing so many Bitcoins into the hands of whales who were just waiting to gobble them all up. And those whales accumulated well over 1 million Bitcoins in the last year, in 2024. And they're continuing to acquire what remains available on the open market at breakneck pace. And they're loving these discounts. And you have to remember these prices right now, right, for most people who don't understand that you can buy fractions of a Bitcoin, or who don't want to own a tiny fraction of a Bitcoin because they think it doesn't have any value. Most people aren't going to buy Bitcoin when it's more than 50 grand, right? Let alone 80 or 90 or 100 or more. They're just not going to buy it. At least not yet. They'll buy it when it's worth millions. And then they'll be like, oh, I own 0.0001 Bitcoin. This is great. Yeah, it is wonderful. But you could have gotten 0.01 or 0.1 now for the same price, and you'll be able to get 0.001 Bitcoin 5 or 10 or 15 years from now. So you could have literally 100 or 1,000 times more Bitcoin now than you'll be able to buy in another 10 or 15 years for the same amount of money, same amount of dollars or euros or whatever you use to buy it. Now, that's not to say that I think the price will go up necessarily 1,000 times in the next 10 or 15 years, but it could. Why do I say that? Well, price has gone up a lot more than that in the last 16 years since Bitcoin was released onto the open market. Right? The returns on Bitcoin went from 0 to like 15 billion% or something insane at the all-time highs that we had back in January, around 109,000 or whatever it was. Whatever that percentage returns is, it's staggeringly insane, right? And you have to remember that basically Bitcoin is likely to increase the returns over time, even though, yes, you're going to have diminishing returns. Obviously, you're not going to get necessarily 10,000% growth in a given year like you did in the first year or two, because it's not starting from 0, it's starting from 100 grand. But that doesn't mean it can't grow 10x or even 100x or even 1,000x from where it is today, right? 1,000x from 100K would put it at, 100 million or something like that. 10x from 100K would put it at a million. 100x would put it at 10 million. 1,000x would put it at 100 million. If you don't think Bitcoin can actually achieve $100 million a coin at some point in the distant future, maybe not in your lifetime, who knows, but maybe in the lifetime of your children or your grandchildren, it certainly could. Now you think, no, that's crazy. Who's going to pay $100 million for Bitcoin? People won't pay $100 million because they won't be able to afford a whole Bitcoin, but they'll be making their income based on the Bitcoin standard as opposed to the dollar standard, or before that, the gold standard. And the reason for that is quite simple. Bitcoin is energy, digital energy. And it is unlike other currencies we currently have. It is better than other currencies we currently have in many ways. If you want to tell me, oh, crypto is a bunch of BS, learn a thing. You could do yourself a favor. Let's put it this way. The United States government has created a Bitcoin reserve, just like it has a gold reserve, just like it has a cheese reserve, just like it has a gas reserve. And yes, the US really does have a cheese reserve. They have reserves of these things in case they should need them in some time of an emergency in the future. They also have these things because they know these things potentially have great value at some point in the future, when the supply will be significantly dwindling and people will be in need of it. And when it's in short supply and there's still a high demand, these things can go for a lot of money and help to balance out short-term deficits and supply shock and other problems caused by having a lack of supply on assets that have a very high demand. So Bitcoin, already the US has the largest reserves of Bitcoin by definition, because they have forfeited, or they have seized rather, hundreds of thousands of Bitcoins over the years from different operations. Obviously, Silk Road being a very significant portion of that, but that's not the only time that they seized Bitcoin. They seized a lot of Bitcoin from a lot of different players for one reason or another. And China also has a lot. China has the second largest number of Bitcoins that we know of. Arguably, you could say China has the most because they have a lot of companies that directly or indirectly they control. So arguably, they possibly have the largest reserves, but given the recent outlays of firms like MicroStrategy or now Strategy and firms like BlackRock, etc., that have bought a lot of Bitcoin in the last year, it very well could still be the US in terms of the American government and American companies. Now, those American companies are not controlled in the same way that Chinese companies are controlled. Right? If you have a Chinese company that's worth a lot of money, the Chinese government has a lot of influence over your company. Even if you have a tiny company, even if you have a one-man shop, the Chinese government has influence over you. In fact, they have a lot of influence over you because then you're entirely at their whim and mercy. Right? But even in a large company, they have a significant amount of influence and control because of all their rules and because of the way they manage companies that are Chinese. In any case, America and China have the largest reserves of Bitcoin at this point, but other countries are also stocking up. Every day we hear about another country launching its own digital reserve of Bitcoin or Bitcoin reserve, and you hear about banks and big institutionalized firms and huge whales making purchases. Companies, some of them small, some of them mid-sized, announcing millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars of Bitcoin that they've recently purchased every single day. What do you think is going to happen? Right? Again, at this point, look, 95%, I've already spoken about this, but basically, really retail, like actual retail people who don't have 100 or more Bitcoin in their wallets anywhere, and 100 is a lot at this point if you're an individual, but that's what's considered a whale or small whale, right? Real whales are 1,000 or more Bitcoins in their wallets, in one wallet. Yeah, retail is anybody that doesn't have 1,000 or more, or even 100 or more Bitcoins. So if you have less than 100 Bitcoins, you're considered retail. And the amount of people that are in the retail space, the total holdings of Bitcoin that they have, really, like when you look at the actual percentage of what's been mined and what will be available after everything's done mining, the entire population of the world, if you remove governments, banks, institutions, and whales, and huge corporations, or corporations who have millions, hundreds of Bitcoin or many millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, the entire population of the world, all 8 billion of us, minus those those exceptions, are scrapping over 1% of the Bitcoin that's mined. 1%. 210,000 Bitcoin, that's it. And that's when it's fully mined, which it isn't. Right now, there's still some percentage of Bitcoin mined over the next 120 years or so. 120, 115, whatever years. And basically, it means that people the world over are fighting for, right, or competing for getting as much as they can of that 1%. But does that mean that in 100 years, there won't be any other currency? No, of course it doesn't mean that. There will always be other currencies. There will always be other currencies for the simple reason that human beings are competitive. And we are not going to just stop being competitive just because Bitcoin is very valuable. And countries are not all just going to suddenly stop using their own currencies just because Bitcoin is very valuable. No, countries still want to control the currency that their citizens use. And countries will continue to control the currency that their citizens use. What countries are not willing to do is to be left in the dust as Bitcoin becomes more and more valuable. They're going to do everything they can to have a firm grip on power into the future, and that includes owning as much Bitcoin as they can. And they already own more than 90% of all the max cap supply that can ever be owned. Far more than 95%, far more than 90%, right? And they're not going to stop. They're going to get as much as they possibly can, which means they really want all of it. When I tell you they want all of it, I mean they want every last Satoshi that they can possibly get. And they don't want you to have any. And if the world does become a world on a TikTok standard, on a Bitcoin standard, they are going to make sure that Bitcoin is worth hundreds of millions of dollars or more, so that there's enough money for people to be paid in Bitcoin. And in fact, at that point, you won't be comparing it to dollars. So you won't think of a Bitcoin as worth $100 million. You'll think of a Bitcoin as worth a Bitcoin. And you'll think of a Bitcoin as this dream thing that maybe you can own a tenth of one. Maybe you can own 20%. Maybe you can own a whole one if you do really well and you start a business and it becomes very successful. And you can own a whole Bitcoin, and then you're set for life, right? That's what's going to happen. People are going to be paid in the equivalent of Satoshis, even if it's in their own currency. But they're not going to be thinking of it as, oh, Bitcoin is worth $20 million, $50 million. No, by the time Bitcoin hits 10 or 20 or $30 million, maybe 50 at the outer limit. I mean, if it takes to 100, it'll be mind-blowing, because I don't think it will. But hey, I could be wrong about that. People are not going to be on the US dollar as the world currency reserve when everybody's being paid in Satoshis. They're going to be on the Satoshi reserve. They're going to be on the Satoshi standard. That's just how it is. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. That's just how it is. Satoshi reserves, Satoshi are the new currency standard for people. Doesn't matter if you like it or not. It really doesn't matter. It matters that it's going to happen. Okay? That's all that matters. It's going to happen. You might not like it. You might wish it was different. But it isn't. And you need to get used to that. So that is what I'm telling you about Bitcoin and whether or not it has bottomed. Now, if you look at the weekly VEPs, if you see the information that the VEPs is telling you, you'll notice Bitcoin is in fact set to make a nice move. Why? Well, there was a nice intersect last week, and that nice intersect of the 30 power mean and that RMLR that was down there already happened. Right? So we already saw last week a very nice 4.5% move to the upside on Bitcoin on week 0 of that intersect. And you got to remember, when you have an intersect, you're likely to see nice moves. Anywhere between 0 and 4 candles, you're likely to see a nice move. And it can be multiple nice moves. It can be in both directions. So we are likely to see more nice movement this week and for the following 3 weeks after that. At some point during this period of time, we're likely to see more nice moves. Now, does that mean that it's immediately going to go off to the races today and we're firing to the moon? Look, anything can happen. But the VEPS indicates to you what is probably going to happen. The weekly time frame is set up very nicely for nice moves. If you are a low time frame trader, it doesn't matter which direction the price goes. If you're a long-term investor, it really doesn't matter which way the price goes, because you probably shouldn't even be looking at charts. Just buy and hold, as they say, or buy and huddle, which is a silly thing, but yeah. If you're a long-term investor, you don't look at the prices every day. You don't even look at the prices every week. Maybe you look at them once a quarter. Maybe you look at them once a year. Right? You just have your lump sum investment. If you did a lump sum investment, if you have a big enough portfolio to do that, or your DCA, dollar cost average, right? You buy routinely, like clockwork, the same fixed amount, no matter what. So if you buy $50 a week, you buy $50 a week. You buy $500 a day, you buy $500 a day. Whatever your budget is that you can afford to invest and effectively burn, because you have to think about investments as, well, I'm throwing this money away. If it returns to me with a positive return on investment, then I did well. And you have to assume, especially when you're long-term investing, that things can go south. Things can go to zero, right? Things do go to zero. But you also have to consider the probability of whether or not Bitcoin will go to zero. And over the past 16 years, it has shown no indication that it's going to zero. Despite all the naysayers, all the people who are butthurt that they didn't get in early enough, all the people who were, feeling the pain that they couldn't hold on to their coins for whatever reason. And now, some years later, it's worth a lot more money. And if they just held on to it, they'd be financially well off. You have to remember, investing is a long game. Trading is a short-term game. And when you see people like Michael Saylor speaking to an audience of people saying trading Bitcoin is a sign of lower intellect, on the one hand, I will agree with him, because 99.9999% of people are terrible at trading. And the proof is that everybody who trades in retail, except the very, very, very tiniest percentage of people, get wrecked. And usually fairly quickly. There's the 90-90-90 rule. 90% of traders lose 90% of their capital within 90 days. And with the amount of leverage people use on crypto exchanges, it's more like 99% of people lose 100% of their capital somewhere between 60 and 75 days. It really is what it is. So, trading is not for everybody. There are people who are good at it. The vast overwhelming majority of people who are consistently profitable trading are trading volatility, usually for HFT firms and quant shops. And then there's a few people in the retail space who trade volatility who also do very well, like in our trading group at Alpha Trading. Sure, are there people who use traditional Voodoo TA and do very well? Yes, but they're like, 1 in 10,000 or something. if that, just statistically, because we see the numbers, right? We were able to measure these things. Maybe you can't, but the data is available, and it's made available from a number of exchanges over the years and HFT firms. And they've demonstrated that the retail market basically loses its money. That's why they call them the dumb money. And that is why they push retail voodoo TA onto them. And they would never use it themselves, right? It's like you drive a, whatever, fancy car, but you sell cheap cars that constantly break down and need maintenance. Okay, I know fancy cars need a lot of maintenance too, but you know what I'm saying. You drive a very high quality car, let's just say one that needs very little maintenance, and you're selling garbage cars to the average person. That's what Voodoo TA tools are. They're garbage cars. Right? They look like cars. You think they look like cars, but they're constantly breaking down. They're constantly failing. They're constantly leading people to misery. Why? Because they're low quality products. They're designed to fail. That's why you shouldn't trade on signals and based on what YouTube Jimmy is telling you when he reads about Bitcoin on the 50 SMA or reads about some stock broker or analyst's advice or report saying, oh, historically, Q2 is always strong on average. That's completely useless garbage. You can't trade like that. High time frame information is completely useless for low time frame trading. And when people say things like, when Michael Saylor himself says it, there's 36 hours a year on average. If you miss those 36 hours, you miss the whole window of opportunity for trading. It's complete and utter nonsense. You can stack gains on Bitcoin 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There are no holidays. There are no breaks. It always is an open market. And you can make a lot more during the course of a year than you can during those mythical, magical 36 hours he claims exists. Which, by the way, there's no statistical proof of that. You can, yeah, sure, I can make an average that shows that too. But it doesn't mean it's a real average. Right? It's just utter nonsense. You can show any want. Keep that in mind. Please trade carefully. Don't just jump into a trade because you think it's going to be good. And stay in it with high leverage and try to swing trade it, right? Because that's just not going to work out well. It's just not going to work out well. So, that will only help you get wrecked. If you're going to trade the VEPs, that's the only way to do it. That's just my friendly advice to you. And yeah, for now, that'll do it. That's going to do it for now. I'll catch you guys in a little bit. Happy trading. Cheers.